The people of Ashenwood had not slept well in months. It was not because of the cold, though the winters in that part of the land were long and gray. It was not because of hunger, though the war had taken many of their strongest men and left the fields short-handed. It was something deeper than all of that. Something that lived in the air of the town, quiet and heavy, like a storm that never quite arrived. Their king had come home, and somehow, that had made everything worse. Caden Blackmoor had left Ashenwood 3 years before, as the kind of man that made people stand a little straighter when he walked into a room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver-gray eyes that always seemed to be thinking 3 steps ahead. He was not the kind of king who ruled from a chair behind closed doors. He worked beside his people, trained beside his soldiers, and laughed loudly at the dinner table. The town had loved him, not out of duty, but out of genuine warmth. When he rode away to war, the whole town had lined the road to watch him go. Women held their children up so they could see. Old men nodded with quiet pride. Everyone believed he would come back victorious, and he did. Ashenwood won. The enemy was driven back. The land was safe. But the man who returned was not the man who had left. Caden walked through the town gates on a Tuesday morning, alone and ahead of his soldiers, and he did not look at anyone. He did not wave. He did not smile. He walked with steady steps, his jaw tight, his silver eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance that only he could see. He went straight to the pack house, climbed the stairs to his chambers, and closed the door. Nobody heard him open it again for several days. His beta, a steady and loyal man named Reese, held the town together during those first weeks. Reese organized the border patrols. Reese settled the small arguments that always came up when people were anxious. Reese sat outside Caden's door more than once, and spoke calmly through the wood, letting the king know what was happening without demanding anything in return. Caden did not respond, but the food Reese left was always gone in the morning. The town spoke in whispers. The soldiers who had come back with Caden were quiet about what had happened, but slowly, carefully, the truth came out in pieces. In the final and most terrible battle of the war, Caden had given a clear order to a group of his younger soldiers, a group made up mostly of men who had volunteered eagerly, men who had everything to prove. He had told them to pull back. The front line was too dangerous. He would handle it with his senior men. They did not pull back. They charged instead, wanting to be part of the victory, wanting to be remembered as brave. And they were brave. Every single one of them. But bravery alone does not stop arrows. It does not stop fire. By the time Caden fought his way to where they had gone, only silence waited for him. He had carried the bodies out of that field himself, one by one, all 12 of them. His soldiers had offered to help, and he had refused, quietly and firmly, as if it were the last thing on earth he could do for those young men, carry them out himself, on his own 2 arms, and bring them home. He had not spoken much after that, not on the long march home, not at the gates of Ashenwood, not in the weeks that followed. Reese eventually called a quiet meeting with the town elders. They sat around a long wooden table and spoke honestly with each other. The town bond, the invisible thread of trust and connection that ran between the king and his people, was weakening. People felt it without being able to name it. Children were restless. Adults were short-tempered. Dogs barked at nothing in the night. An alpha who was present held his town together in ways that went far beyond decisions and laws. When the alpha was broken inside, the whole town felt the absence of something they could not quite explain. They needed someone to help Caden, not a soldier, not an elder, not a political advisor, someone with a different kind of skill entirely. Reese contacted a small neutral settlement 2 days' ride from Ashenwood. They sent back a name. Senna Ashvale. She arrived on a gray Thursday morning, riding a calm brown horse, and carrying 1 travel bag and 1 small wooden case of herbs and supplies. She was not what the town expected. She was not tall or commanding. She was a small woman with warm brown skin, dark eyes that moved slowly, and saw everything, and an expression so calm it was almost strange. She looked like someone who had spent a great deal of time around pain, and had learned not to be frightened by it. Reese met her at the gate, and walked her to the pack house. He gave her a careful and thorough explanation of the situation on the way. He told her not to push, not to challenge, not to mention the war unless Caden brought it up first. He told her the king had not left his chambers in weeks, and that 3 previous healers had been turned away before they even had a chance to speak. Senna listened to everything Rhys said. She thanked him, and then she did something completely unexpected. She walked to Caden's chamber door, sat down on the stone floor outside it, took a book out of her bag, and began to read. That was all. No knocking, no speaking, no announcement of who she was or why she had come. She simply sat there in the hallway, quiet and unhurried, turning pages. Caden opened the door after about an hour, most likely expecting another elder with another urgent concern. He found a small woman sitting cross-legged on the floor, completely absorbed in a book, apparently unbothered by the cold stone beneath her, or the fact that she was sitting outside a king's chambers uninvited. She looked up at him. She did not bow immediately, or scramble to her feet in a panic. She just looked at him calmly, and said, "I am not here to fix you. I am just here." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he went back inside and closed the door. But he did not send her away. She came back the next morning, and the one after that. She always brought her book and sometimes a small cup of tea. She sat in the hallway like it was the most natural place in the world to be, and she never demanded anything from the closed door in front of her. On the 4th day, Caden opened the door and asked, without any warmth but without hostility either, what book she was reading. She told him. He made a short, non-committal sound and went back inside. But that day, the door stayed open a few inches. On the 7th morning, she left a bowl of warm soup outside his door before she took her usual seat. She did not mention it, or look at the door when she set it down. By the time she left that evening, the bowl was empty and clean, placed neatly to the side. On the 10th day, they sat on opposite sides of the open doorway and said nothing to each other for almost 2 hours. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was simply quiet. The kind of quiet that happens between 2 people who have stopped pretending. Senna was observant. She did not study Caden openly, but she noticed things over those days and weeks. She noticed that he never opened the curtains on the eastern side of his room, where the view faced the direction of the old battlefield. She noticed that the sound of the younger people in the courtyard below made him go very still, as if the sound of laughter landing wrong somewhere inside him. She noticed the small iron pendant he wore around his neck, which he touched without thinking when the room got too quiet. She never asked about the pendant. She had learned that the things people were most private about were often the things they most needed to speak aloud, and that they would only do it when they felt completely safe. She waited. It was well past midnight on the 22nd night of her stay when she heard him through the slightly open door, not pacing, as she had heard on other nights. Something different, a low, controlled sound, like someone trying very hard to hold something enormous inside themselves. She pushed the door open and walked in. Caden was sitting on the floor with his back against the stone wall, one knee drawn up, the pendant held tightly in one closed fist. His silver eyes were wet. He looked at her as she came in, and his expression was complicated. Shame and relief and grief and exhaustion, all tangled together in a single look. She sat down beside him on the cold floor without hesitation, not too close, just present. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I gave them an order. They did not follow it, and now they are gone because of me." Senna did not rush to respond. She let the words sit in the room for a moment before she said, "Or they made a choice. It was their choice, and they paid for it with everything they had, and you have been carrying their choice as if it was yours to carry." He did not say anything. She continued quietly, "Carrying it does not bring them back. It only makes sure that you are also lost." For a moment, nothing moved in the room. Then Caden, the king of Ashenwood, the man who had led armies, the man who had carried 12 bodies out of a burning field on his own 2 arms, put his face in his hands, and finally, after 3 long and terrible years, allowed himself to grieve. Senna did not reach for him without permission. She did not offer soft words or empty comfort. She just stayed where she was, steady and solid, and completely unafraid, and she let him be exactly as broken as he was, because she knew that this was not the end of something. This was the beginning. When it passed, and the room went quiet again, Caden leaned his head back against the stone wall and closed his eyes. He looked exhausted in the way that people only look, after they have finally put down something very heavy. He said, without opening his eyes, what was in the pendant belonged to one of them, the youngest one. His name was Elias. He was 17 years old, and he wanted very badly to do something that mattered. He did, Senna said. He mattered to you. That is not nothing. Caden did not reply, but something in his face shifted, quietly and completely, like ice at the very first edge of spring. After that night, things changed. Not all at once, but in the steady way that real things change. Caden began to attend pack meetings again. He began to eat at the table with his soldiers. He began to walk the borders again in the early mornings, which had always been something he did when he was himself. The town felt it immediately. People smiled more easily. The restlessness in the air began to ease. Children slept better. The old men stopped standing in worried clusters by the market. Senna told Reese she would be leaving soon. Her work was done. Reese looked at her in the careful way of a man who knows something that he has decided not to say out loud. On the night before she was set to leave, a small group of wandering troublemakers breached the outer border of Ashenwood. It was a minor incident, quickly handled, but in the brief confusion, one of them slipped through and made it into the forest on the eastern edge of the territory. Senna had gone walking there that evening, alone with her thoughts and the clean forest air. Caden was halfway across the packhouse when he felt it. He did not know how to explain it, except that something in the very center of him went suddenly sharp and alert, in a way that was completely different from the alarm of normal danger. He was running before he had finished thinking. He found her in the trees, and he handled the situation quickly and without any real difficulty. But standing there in the dark forest afterward, breathing hard, looking at her standing just a few feet away, completely calm as always, and watching him with those steady eyes, something in him recognized something in her, in a way that had no simple name. She looked at him and said, I know what you are afraid of. You are afraid that if you care deeply about something, you will fail it one day. And he said nothing. She said, that is not a reason to care about nothing. He looked at her for a long moment. The pendant was warm against his chest. The forest was very quiet around them. He said, stay. It was the first time in 3 years that he had asked for anything at all. She stayed. The town of Ashenwood had its king back. Not the same king who had ridden away 3 years before. He would never be that exact person again, and there was no point in pretending otherwise. He was different now, more careful, more honest about what he could and could not carry. He still had hard mornings sometimes, when the memories were louder than the present. He still kept the pendant around his neck, and always would. But Senna was there, not to erase anything, or pretend the past had not happened. She was there the same way she had been there from the first day, steady, present, completely unafraid of whatever the day brought. He had spent 3 years trying to carry the weight of everything alone, believing that asking for help was the same as failure. She had spent 3 years understanding that the bravest thing a person can do is simply allow someone else to sit beside them in the dark. The town of Ashenwood slept peacefully that winter. The borders were strong. The fires in the hearths burned warm and steady. And in the packhouse, the king who had come home broken, sat beside the woman who had never once tried to fix him, and found, quietly and completely, that he was whole.